Hello everyone, back with a quick video about the relatively new Voigtlander 65mm APO Lanthar macro for the Z mount, Nikon Z mount. This is just to show you how sharp it is, like wide open compared to its any competing lenses. This is gonna be a relatively quick one. I just wanted to show you how sharp it is wide open. I mean, I'm not gonna show you any sample comparisons with like its optimum aperture, like f8 or f11, because in most macro lenses at this working aperture and working distance, they're all pretty sharp. So there's no point in doing that. But I think this is at least to me, it's a very interesting information for anyone who might want to know what effort Voigtlander and Cosina has put into making sure that this lens is one of their best. Okay, so like I said, this is a comparison with an existing lens that I own, which is the 55mm micro Nikkor. This is the version of the lens that has the plastic barrel. So this is the micro Nikkor AF screw drive mount, the one with the plastic barrel without the D designation. So it's one of the sharpest lenses that I own, despite its age. Yeah, so let's get right through it. Again, before I even proceed further, I just wanted to explain about the way Nikon does macro for those who are not using Nikon cameras. Like I mentioned, the shots presented that you're seeing right now are shot wide open. The Voigtlander on the left side and the Nikon on the right side. The Nikon's widest open aperture is f2.8, but you see here it says f4. The way Nikon does macro exposure is that the way it records the aperture in the EXIF, or at least during the operation of the camera, is that it gives you the effective aperture. What that means is that in this case, it says f4, but the depth of field is still f2.8. What the thought process is, like at least for Nikon, which kind of makes sense, is that as the subject gets closer to the imaging plane, which is the sensor, there's a light loss. You need more light to get the equivalent exposure. And that's what Nikon cameras normally takes into account when it gives you that aperture as you're doing the exposure and eventually what gets recorded in the EXIF information. Now, in my opinion, this kind of makes sense in the film era, but in the digital era, I don't think it makes sense anymore. And I'll probably have another video about that, so that's topic for another day. So let's get right to it. Let's start with 100%. It may not be obvious here, but right here, the two are pretty much neck and neck. Without batting an eye, they're probably equally as sharp. However, let's start with the edges. You can see here that the Voigtlander resolves so much more detail compared to the Nikon one. One can argue that it might be out of focus on the Nikon. I guess that's debatable, but to me, this is just like I think it's an optical flaw on the Nikon because it's not so much about being out of focus, but it's more of an astigmatism, like smearing, and it becomes more apparent as we go into the corners. As you can see, the Voigtlander is still pretty sharp, but there's more astigmatism on the Nikon. Similar here, like look at the details of the hair right here compared to the one that's on the Nikon. Mind you, again, this is wide open. Nikon, given like how old it is, it's still pretty good, but it just gets demolished by the Voigtlander. And just for the sake of completeness, this is the other corner. I'm not sure if this is apparent on the video, but it's still pretty obvious that the Voigtlander is sharper. Now with going at the 200%, now it becomes even more obvious that the Voigtlander is sharper. Like the details on the dot is even more detailed. The edges of those dots are even more pronounced on the Voigtlander, while the Nikon is there's loss of detail and contrast already here. So that's how much more detailed the Voigtlander is. And mind you, this is just at the middle. Like it even gets more obvious as you go to the edges compared to the 100% that I showed earlier. So yeah, that's how good the Voigtlander is. Now, just for the sake of answering the question, can the Voigtlander do better? Stop down. Well, the answer I could show you right now. So this is the Voigtlander lens at 2.0, and on the right, that's the same lens at 2.8. Going at 200% right away on the right eye, you can see there's even more detail resolved by the lens at f2.8, which is, to me, it's mind-blowing. So yeah, that's how sharp the lens is as you even stop down by one stop. Here you can see there's even more details resolved, like the white specks that's barely visible at f2.0 on the corners is now very visible at f2.8. I can only imagine, like, look at that, like the contrast and the detail is even more pronounced at f2.8. Look at the corners here, like the very detail, those white dots in the corners is so much better at that f2.8. So yeah, there you go. If you're thinking about getting this lens, I don't think there's any question on like how good it is. Like why the Cosina and Voigtlander labeled this as an APO Lanthar. It deserves the nomenclature. Okay.